with, my goodness, associated with a large collaboration that is sponsored by VAER. The views that I'm expressing are my own and do not represent my university, the Department of Defense, of the federal government. Next slide, please. All right, so when we're talking about chronic debilitating disease, I know we've been working through this, but it's important to understand what we're talking about. A chronic disease or a chronic issue lasts more than a year. Debilitating means serious impairment of normal activity, and disease, a disruption of health. So we're talking about significant major impacts that impacts abilities, a person's ability to have a normal quality of life, to be a productive member of society. These are all very negative aspects that significantly impact our citizens and our world's population with regard to their ability to live their best life. Next slide, please. When we're looking about these types of diseases in women, you'll notice in the far left, you've seen slides similar to this. I'm just putting it down so you can kind of see them side by side, that there are a significant number of female specific disease processes that are unique and cause substantial chronic debilitating issues. There's also female prevalent, poorly understood diseases in women, and those that have notable morbidity in women. Next slide, please. If you look at the impact of these diseases compared to the commitment that we have at the National Institutes of Health, you'll notice that there's a notable disparity. For every woman who goes through menarche, begins to have periods, she is ultimately going to go through menopause. Of those, 85%, or approximately 140 million American citizens, are impacted by this disease. And yet the NIH support of this is far less than 1%. And if you look down the line, you'll see the millions of impacted citizens and the effort that's put forth. And one thing that I think is important to recognize is that we have very highly prevalent diseases that are not well studied, not well understood, and therefore we have a very difficult time treating these and providing benefit for them. Next slide, please. So you'll notice I'm focusing specifically on fibroids. This talk could easily focus on anything that is listed on this page, and you'd come to the same conclusions. But what I'd like to do is do a bit of a deeper dive into uterine fibroids so you have a better understanding of what we know and what we don't know, so that you can reach a conclusion as to whether we require significantly more effort in these areas to assist and provide care for our patients. Next slide, please. If you look at fibroids in active duty women, I work over across the street at the Uniformed Services University and Walter Reed, and we have a specific interest in active duty women. You'll notice a couple of important points in the slide. You'll notice that every woman or every group of women, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of race, has an increasing prevalence of uterine fibroids as they age. However, you'll notice there's a substantial disparity in that Black women have a much greater risk of the development of uterine fibroids and the development of symptomatic fibroids as they age, and that these times in which these patients are symptomatic are right during both the reproductive years and during their prime working years. Next slide. If you look at it through the entire reproductive lifespan, what you can see is that by the end of the reproductive years, by the early 50s, 70% of white women or Caucasian women and 80% of Black women will have identifiable uterine fibroids. Of those, a proportion will be symptomatic, and we're going to talk about those in a moment, but you're talking about a substantial number of women who are suffering from uterine fibroids. Next slide. What happens where patients that have uterine fibroids, the most well understood areas, they have menstrual bleeding. This interferes with the physical, emotional, social, and material quality of life, and impacts approximately 30% of women in their lifetime, uterine fibroids being one of the most common causes of heavy menstrual bleeding. Very common cause of gynecologic visits, and the cost, looking at the impact throughout the lifespan, is approximately $12 billion. And this includes lost days of work and severe impacts of quality of life. But heavy menstrual bleeding is not the only problem associated with uterine fibroids. Next slide. One of the other issues is also pain. As these tumors grow, and I'm going to show you them so you can see them, they can compress other tissues, they can impact other areas, and they can cause both pains associated with menstrual periods, low back pain, pelvic pressure, general abdominal pain, and pain during sex. And approximately 1 in 4 of such symptoms are going to be extremely bothersome for the patients who are suffering. So we're talking about a highly prevalent, highly symptomatic disease process, but we're not done. Next slide, please. If you look at patients who attempt to achieve pregnancy, fibroids are associated with increased risk of losing their pregnancy. So among those couples, we're losing otherwise healthy pregnancies due to the fact that fibroids are present. And if those of you who are familiar looking at these tables, you can see that this particular bar at the very bottom doesn't include one. For those who aren't familiar with looking at these, if you can look at the pink circle at the bottom, if it's towards the left of the one, it means that if you don't have fibroids, you're less likely to have a miscarriage. And if it was to the right of one, it would suggest that you're less likely to have miscarriage if you had fibroids. But in this case, having fibroids is a negative association for those women who want to carry a child to term and have a happy, healthy baby. For the women who do manage to carry a child to term, next slide, there's other obstetric risks associated with fibroids. And as you can see, if you look in the far right column, for those who are familiar, odds ratios are all above 1. There's a significant risk associated with uterine fibroids in each of these categories. And to put the absolute ratio of the impact, you're looking at approximately 50% of women who are going to have an abnormal labor, about the same who are ultimately going to have a cesarean section. Approximately 1 in 7 are going to have preterm delivery. There's breech, postpartum hemorrhage, premature rupture of membranes, placenta previa, and abruption that are all at increased risk because these fibroids exist. Next slide, please. So the question is, what are they? This is obviously, we need to understand what they are, and we need to understand what knowledge we can apply to deal with these fibroids so that these patients aren't suffering these highly negative outcomes. Next slide. In the upper right-hand picture, you can see a uterine fibroid attached to the bottom of a uterus. And for those who are familiar with the standard drawings of the uterus and the fallopian tubes going to the right or left, you can see that above the metal bar that is placed there, and below that is a uterine fibroid that is attached to that. And you can see that it's roughly the same size as the uterus itself. And you can imagine that that fibroid can be compressing on other tissues because they're very hard, and therefore creating pain that is unamenable to any particular therapy because it's not an inflammatory process, it's a compression injury. Microscopically, you can see in this slide, and I will show you other slides, where you see that it's a disordered bundle of cells and all this extra scar tissue that's around them. These tend to grow during the time in which women have undergone menarche. They begin to have periods, and they tend to regress after the end of periods. So we have learned many years ago that they're associated with the presence of estrogen and progesterone, and they tend to grow in the setting of these hormones. Next slide. Is this a new phenomenon? The answer is no. This is an example of a 5,000-year-old calcified mass that was found in a burial ground in Switzerland, demonstrating that not only were there fibroids thousands of years ago, but that these fibroids are very stable. So unlike other disease processes, where if we identified a cure that could specifically focus on uterine fibroid cells, kill them all, and not have any impact on other cells, that it would be great for a cancer, that would cure cancer. But for fibroids, they have all of that scar tissue, and that scar tissue isn't going anywhere unless we develop therapies that specifically address and break down that scar tissue. And those are the types of things that many research efforts have been directed at, is to better understand how that scar tissue develops so that we can develop therapies. Next slide. So you can see here, this is a uterus that is cut in half, with a fibroid that's cut in half in the far left. And you can see the impact that it has, not just on the uterus, but that it can extend outside of the uterus. And the pictures to the middle and right, the blue staining represents collagen or scar tissue, and what you can see in the middle figure is that there's quite a bit of scar tissue on the in the fibroid, but far less in the normal uterus, because that's more for structural, is for the collagen really supports the structure of the normal myometrium or muscle to allow for contraction, whereas fibroids produce an abundance, an overabundance of the scar tissue, and that scar tissue requires us to break that down. Next slide, please. So knowing what we know about fibroids, how have we used the knowledge to provide benefit for our treatments? Well, one thing that we have done is we've not recognized that fibroids need blood. That's not a terribly innovative insight. And frankly, it's been known for probably over 150 years. And that has led to the development of hysterectomy, myomectomy, urinary embolization, where we obstruct blood flow into the fibroid, occlusion, where we simply occlude them surgically. We can burn the fibroid, we can freeze a fibroid. But generally speaking, these therapies are destructive in nature because the goal is to obstruct blood. So we need better ideas as to how to do this. And to get better ideas, we need to better understand it. Next slide, please. Well, as I mentioned, fibroids tend to begin growing in the presence of gonadal hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and decrease in size as the estrogen and progesterone continue or end at menopause. So we have developed therapies, and these concepts are probably in the range of 50 years old, where we develop therapies that block the production of estrogen and progesterone from the ovary and therefore decrease size. And we've attempted to develop various therapies along these lines, but again, the concepts that we use to try to treat these fibroids are very simplistic, and therefore our therapies end up being very simplistic. Next slide. I've listed here all of the different treatment options that we have for uterine fibroids, and it seems like a lot of different options. So theoretically, we should be fine. But the first thing we should do is remove the options that don't work, like oral contraceptive pills and nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory agents. These are ineffective therapies. Next slide. So after removing those, then we have to address the ones in which for patients who want to have children and want to protect their uterus, what options do we have for those patients? And many of the severely destructive ones end up doing substantial damage to the uterus and don't allow us to achieve pregnancy. So we have to remove those. Next slide. And then, and we have to remove the medications that would prevent pregnancy. Then we have to remove the medications that aren't FDA approved. Next slide. And finally, we have to remove the ones that aren't terribly effective for patients who aren't good surgical candidates, who've had multiple surgeries in the past, who have other diseases that are associated with pelvic inflammation or scarring that make these types of interventions not possible. Next slide. And ultimately, this is our list of consistently effective therapies that we have for uterine fibroids based upon our simplistic understanding of how uterine fibroids develop. Next slide. So why do we have such terrible options and such minimal understanding after 150 years of study? One of the biggest challenges that we have is that if you think about the uterus and think about what it does, it is something that can grow to 50 times its normal size. It's something that supports life. It's truly a miracle, not just of engineering, but as far as delivering and creating life. But based upon that, it is by far the most disrespected organ in the body. People will often say, if you're no longer having children, you can have your uterus removed. We wouldn't say that about any particular other organ. This is not something that we offer for any other organ in the body. But for the uterus, we remove it because the assumption is that the only purpose of the uterus is to support a pregnancy and it serves no other function. The challenge is that once it's removed through hysterectomy, you've created a hole in the pelvic floor, which can result in prolapse and other issues, stress urinary incontinence, and many other problems associated with post-surgical impacts of hysterectomy. So that option really is a substandard option. And again, one that we've had for a very long time. One of the other challenges that we have is a big symptom taboo, that talking about menstrual bleeding and talking about menstrual periods is something that is embarrassing and shaming. If I were sitting here and you suddenly saw blood pouring out of my nose and I tried everything I could do to stop it, and I am soaking pads as blood pours out of my nose, every hour I'm soaking 2 pads, you'd be concerned for me and you'd tell me to go to the emergency room and you would be worried for me. But when this happens to a woman who's having periods, she almost has to hide it, as if it's a shame that she's having the exact same symptoms as I have, only because, and the only difference being where the blood is extruding from. So the problem is that we need to normalize the concept that menstrual bleeding is like everything else. Poor models. We don't really understand. I've spent my career trying to develop better models to better understand it. When I started in this field, the only thing we could do was remove fibroids from patients, section them, and then compare them to normal tissue. And that left us with a very poor snapshot of how fibroids develop. And I've spent a long time trying to develop good models to better understand this, to the point where we can grow humanoid fibroid or human fibroid tumors in the lab and have them grow in vivo in situ in a mouse uterus that allows us to better understand how these fibroids impact not just pregnancy, but heavy menstrual bleeding and other issues. We're now to that point because we've had such a limited time. And then also we have the poor focus issue where it's very difficult to get consistent support to do these types of research. Next slide. Here's a list, and I'll let you read this on your own, and hopefully you'll have a list of these. These are areas, remaining gaps that are associated with uterine fibroids. But I draw your attention to the right, where you see that 2 out of 3 of these, whenever there is a fibroid application, it's typically an ad hoc. It's given as, well, people are concerned about fibroids, we'll do 1 grant and then that's it. There's not a consistent effort to understand uterine fibroids and to develop novel insights that allow us to better treat these fibroids. Next slide. So what do we need? Well, we can do studies and better understanding how women do with general health issues is we're doing a lot of things that are very small, and we need to move beyond these. We've tried these and they don't work. Stepping back from fibroids to all of women's health. If we're doing a study and we simply decide to add women to that study, that is not the same thing as studying women. For example, if we're doing a big study on breast cancer, adding a few men to the study who happen to get breast cancer is not the same as studying male breast cancer. Male breast cancer is a different disease process that requires specific focus on men who have breast cancer. The same is true for women. And this becomes a major issue that we're just by adding women to a study, that's a start, but we should be studying women. We can't keep doing intermittent research because we can't get enough going on to really advance the field and benefit an enormous number of patients. And the diseases that are unique, I'm sorry, go forward one more slide. The diseases that are unique result in a lifelong disability. So I would recommend the development of a National Institute of Women's Health that addresses specific diseases that are unique or more common in women. And this institute can collaborate with the other institutes that are doing research in women, but are doing it as part of their specific focus. And the National Institute of Women's Health will focus on these specific diseases and working with others to improve women's health. Next slide. So what do we get from this? Well, one, as we study women and as we study diseases unique to women, we get decreased death, decreased disability, and decreased suffering for the woman. We improve her quality of life, and societally, we improve her productivity, which benefits the entire society. And as women are the caretakers of the children and the elderly, we also improve the care for children and we improve care for the elderly. There's a huge payoff for our National Institute of Women's Health. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I'll be very happy to answer any questions.